All right, so some schedule. I think we should start with going over the schedule. This week there is a good amount going on. Today is really the first real day of the first sprint. This is where I feel like at this point we should be ready to start contributing code. We should feel like we have the basics in play, where we know how to hopefully from this utilize Git a little bit more and avoid some of the future problems that you will run into. I think it's important to know feedback on this assignment now. How was it to interface with? And also by the end of the quarter, I will probably also be talking to people about how much did you refer back to what you learned from this, if anything, for the issues that you had this quarter? Was that useful for saving you time and saving major headaches throughout the quarter? Or if not, I will really want to hear what that process was like. I'll gather a bunch of information and I'll make an informed decision about how I can better introduce Git in the future. So also this week, so I guess point number one, Scrum start today, since it's officially the first day of the first sprint. In a week and a half, we're going to meet with the client and we will demo everything working to the best ability that we have. Priorities for that should be on the user experience and the interface. If there are a little bit of functionality that's not quite working yet, that's okay. It's not the sprint deadline. It's just the point where you can get feedback from the client. Is this what you were looking for? What feedback do you have? What can we change to make this a better experience for you? Those kinds of questions you'll be asking the client during the client meeting. That's a week from Wednesday. Today and tomorrow, we will have a bit of book discussion as well as some new content. And Wednesday, I want to go over a full design for all of you. I want you to have something ready with regards to, it doesn't have to be something to present to me, but be able to, and every member of your team should be able to do this, talk about the design of your project. You're all on the same page at that point, and be able to talk about, draw out your design on the board and validate it to me, justify why you made the decisions that you did. Again, I don't expect that they're perfect, but I expect that it was a consensus that you came to, or that there's good discussion happening about the benefits and detriments. Everyone should be able to describe why they're implementing it the way that they are. And that way I can identify some weaknesses and some holes. Also by Wednesday, I would like to see your user stories posted so that I can get you feedback within the next day or two, so that you can take a pass over. Usually what I see is the first sprint's user stories. On that first pass, there are quite a few improvements that people can make. And so I want to give you that feedback so that by the time you submit them, they are the best work that you can do and don't just get a poor grade because there wasn't any communication and a back and forth process to work on. So get them to me by Wednesday and I will get you some feedback by the weekend so you can iterate on them by the time the sprint is due. Thursday, Thursday is the quiz day. So I guess at the start of Wednesday during lab, I may ask you if you have any questions about the study guide, which has been posted. So feel free to take a look at that study guide and make up to a page of notes, front and back, that you can use during the quiz. And that will just be all day on Thursday's class. I don't design them to be that long, but if you finish early, a little bit of spare time for you.
Page of notes like this?
Yep, any 8.5 by 11, doesn't have to be lined, doesn't have to be clear, I don't really care what's on it other than that, but yeah.
Front and back.
Front and back. Can have anything on it that you want, that you think will be useful.
I could have fit a whole book in there.
Yeah, use 2-point font, bring a magnifying glass. The craziest and coolest things I've seen are using different colored ink horizontally and vertically. You can even bring in 3D glasses and choose which you're looking horizontally or vertically at the text. That gets a little on the far side of it, but I have seen people try to interleave the fonts to get more information on there. Again, I don't really care. I design my quizzes and exams to try to not just be something that you would look up, Although sometimes it's a little bit challenging in this class, because sometimes there's just some information that you really just need to know. And if there's an answer or two on your study guide, oh no, the world has ended. I'm pretty sure I've biased the whole class to such an extent that not. Questions about the upcoming schedule? 2 weeks out from the first sprint deadline?
For all of our code, like splitting it up, we're supposed to be using like GitHub tasks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the tasks to be where the actual, so you'll take your user stories, convert them into scenarios, convert those into tasks, put the tasks on GitHub tasks so that I can see them, then they'll be checked out by members of your team and implemented. And once they're functioning to what everyone in your team is happy with, then you can move them to complete it.
So we need our user stories first.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it, to make sure that it's probably possible in this first sprint to just start in on it, because I gave you all of the requirements in some kind of written form. But usually it'll be you who is creating that from some verbal back and forth with the client. And then I will take the project manager's shoes, saying, given the client said to do this, this, and this, my expectations of your implementation are that you do something like this.
I missed that day, but user stories are features we're working on, right?
Yeah, they're the client language features for the program.
So the client understands what we're talking
Right.
about.
They are mapped directly into acceptance tests, so that you can say, based on these user stories that I wrote, we did that.
The
All of
developer,
those, yeah, all of those are embedded in the program. We agreed that this is the complete version of what we are implementing based on your language. Here are the features that you want to be able to do in these particular instances. So they're not technical at all. You convert them down into technical language, go implement them, and then feed them back to the client in the form of acceptance tests.
so the developer writes the user stories
Yeah.
of features or whatever, so the client understands what's going on, what's being implemented.
Yeah, that's the agreement you have with the client, is basically the user story of, here's what you want me to do, and that's it. The client can say, yes, that's what I want you to do.
Okay.
And I assume there will be a little bit of back and forth. I had that with one group this weekend who was starting on some user stories and was talking about them. If you start talking in Discords, I am occasionally monitoring those Discords, so there's a little bit more back and forth that's possible if you're having public-facing discussions about things. I can sometimes assert myself in there and say, what have you thought about this instead of that? Try using this language instead of that language, something of the sort. So the more forward-facing or front-facing you are, the more useful and helpful I can be in that process.
So you do monitor all our stuff.
To the extent to which I can be helpful.
Okay.
I am looking at it to that extent. I don't want you to do too much filtering. If you're swearing in there, I don't really care. It doesn't have to be incredibly professional, especially in the non-professional channels like general. The entire purpose of my looking at it is, can I be helpful? Can I save you time? Can I keep you from going down the wrong branch? Yeah, I do occasionally, it'll be less and less throughout the quarter. But especially early on, I just want to make sure everyone is on the right track, not wasting a ton of their own time. Other questions before we start talking book? Lots going on, lots on the calendar, lots on the schedule. They'll get the book chapter read. There was a lot to do this weekend. All right, so I guess the first important point from that second chapter was talking about culture, team culture especially. But does anyone want to talk to me about their view on just what a strong culture is? That was a term that was used. But in your opinion or your view, what creates a strong culture? Yeah.
I think like the thing that makes the strongest culture is just any culture that a whole group can agree on. It's not necessarily like one culture has to be stronger than others. It's just like if our group thinks one culture is the strongest, then that's our strongest culture. But
yeah,
that might not work on another group.
Yeah, absolutely. There kind of becomes a local maximum for given the people who are in your group, how do you perform well together? How well do you communicate? What does that look like? How do you bring each other up? How do you get the most out of each other so that the group can perform at its maximal form? That will be a strong culture. You can't say this creates a strong culture, this creates a weak culture, and be too specific with that, because it does involve members. But do note that, especially in industry, those members will be moving a little bit. You'll get a new member to your culture. Someone who is helping to create the strong culture that exists will leave the company or be fired for reasons outside of their or your control. So how do you deal with that change, keeping your culture as strong as possible?
Everyone be on the same page.
Yeah, that's great. If someone new is coming into the team, how do you make sure that everyone is on the same page, including the new person? The book talked about having your culture being open to small change without really being open to large change. As soon as you allow for large change, then any one change can drastically change the culture, take something that's working and drag it into something that's not working. But small change, you should be open to, because when a new member comes in, they're going to pull that equilibrium a little bit in their direction to be able to work with them. As a member identifies an issue with your culture, something that's not working for them, you should be able to adapt and find a new local maximum that incorporates that feedback. So open to small change that improves the culture, and resistant to radical change was the conclusion there. Because radical change destroys strong culture. Sometimes. Usually. Other thoughts on that topic? What can you do to create and foster a strong culture? What's in your power with regards to doing that as just one member of the team? Yeah.
Well, the only thing you really have control over in your team is yourself, so just presenting yourself in a way that's respectful. Kind of not like enforcing culture, but more culture will happen. It's your job to find your role.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. From this class's perspective, I think what I see is the issue that permeates the most is an inability to advocate for yourself. Thinking that there is this strong culture that exists without me, I am the problem, so I am going to suck it up and just deal with it. That fosters resentment. It is a way of putting yourself down or making yourself less important than everyone else in the group. And your voice is equally important to everyone else's voice in the group. So if there is an issue, be vocal about it. Advocate for the change that you want to see within your group without forcing the issue. Don't say, my way or else, but yeah, please do advocate for yourself. One thing I forgot to mention is that the first peer review for this will be next week and cover kind of everything up to that point. So next Tuesday, there will be a peer review on how well things are going for a self-reflection, as well as for the contributions that you see from everyone else in your team.
So, excuse me. So by the loose timeline that you have on the syllabus, it says we're probably gonna have a quiz this week,
Yep, we are having a quiz on Thursday.
but the first peer review has been pushed back.
Yeah, the first peer review, we haven't really done enough. If I had a peer review for Tuesday, it would be about how involved were you in the 20 minutes we had of a design. The sprint hasn't really gotten off the ground yet, and so one piece of feedback that I had is that people didn't really have a sample size large enough in the first peer review to mark anyone down, and so bad habits were being formed already because there was lack of negative feedback on something that hadn't become an issue yet. So to try to address that, I think it's more important to have that first peer review be after a week of development. So that the first feedback people are getting, or lack of feedback if there isn't an issue, is think something needs to change. And remember that part of advocating for yourself is being a little bit harsher on your teammates when they're doing something that is not productive. Right? It's feedback that you want to give them. Rather than not saying anything, you just putting it all in the peer review, make sure that you talk to them first, or that you bring up a concern for the group at large. Don't just hold it all inside and ream them on the peer reviews after having putting a nice face forward to them in person. That's not gonna help your team culture at all if they're getting some feedback that says things aren't going so well, and every interaction they've had has been very positive with everyone in the group. Is gonna feel like people are being fake. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone if there is an issue pointed out in a peer review. That's the best way to put it. And don't let your desire to avoid a conflict lead to your inability to criticize them in a peer review. Because we need to address all of those changes. The book talked a little bit about culture being self-selecting. Something like productivity attracts productivity, and toxicity attracts toxicity. So be the change you want to see within your group, because you will be a leader by doing that, by just treating others the way you want to be treated. That will set the tone for the interactions within your group. That is how a leader works. Anyone have any experience out in industry of a self-selecting culture? Anything that they want to share about how that happened? Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were just asking for experience.
Oh, yeah.
I have far too much.
No pressure.
What would be a good story? Third deployment in 2018. While we were deployed, I had 3 guard units roll through. So that's kind of the active duty guys, we have to stay there for our months, and the guard usually gets their partial time, about half of what we got, and then they roll out, and then we catch the guys who came with us, the next group, and then the leading edge of the guys who are coming in. So we have to filter through a lot of these counteracting personalities.
Sure.
The difference in between Sioux City Guards unit and Pittsburgh's guard unit, they don't tend to mesh well with guys that work on aircraft every single day of their week versus someone who picks it up and does it when they can.
Sure.
And it ends up with, typically you end up with a active duty looking down on guard unit mentality of, oh, they don't know what they're doing. And it tends to be that you're not able to empathize because all you're doing is working all the time, and these folks came in and just plop down. It can be anything from they're not trained to your standards or something. It tends to be very individualistic, but yeah, it's hard to find that mesh. And usually it comes down to, if you can't get along with the way that they work, it tends to be able to, if you get along with the individual people better, and work comes up to where everybody can get a good middle ground as you go on. I mean, yeah, that tends to be some of my culture shock type of mentality. Like I've done this many times.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's especially true in any time that you're around lots of people, is that you you find ways to interface with that culture and or the culture can be great, the culture can be awful, or anything in between. Mission statements. What made for a good mission statement?
Specific.
Yeah, specific, some kind of bound to a scope. Those are both excellent points. So just about every mission statement designed by a marketing major is terrible. Aim to be better than a marketer. Let's take a stab at that. Imagine writing a mission statement for the company that is your group for the project that you're doing this quarter. Take 30 seconds, come up with a specific mission statement.
Integrity first.
Make
Hate that.
sure
crap.
passes the class.
Grades matter, excellent. But imagine this being an actual company. What would that mission statement be like? And once you have something that's pretty good, feel free to raise your hand. We'll see if we can get a sense of what a solid mission statement might look like for this project.
Heck, whoa, Jim, we're better than you, and we know it.
I know they're hard to not try to make funny because
Honestly. Funny is how you sell it. Funny, memorable.
yeah,
I think that's how I think that's how they actually try and think. Because they need their product to stand out.
what would represent what you are trying to bring to the table with this? How would you succinctly describe your methodology for creating this project this quarter?
Providing industry quality code through industry quality procedures.
Okay. Providing industry quality code through industry quality procedures. I like it. Any other ideas for a mission statement?
Our mission of the command line UML project provide a lightweight, efficient, and user-friendly command line interface for creating and editing diagrams.
Who wrote that?
I just wrote that.
Sweet. That sounds good. That is specific. That is, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Next important topic, meetings, because we all hate them. Oh, it's a kind of a big topic here. So when was a synchronous meeting important? So two different kinds of meetings, synchronous and asynchronous meetings. When is it important for you to all be in the same room discussing something together? When should you call for that? Or when should you want to be together? Yeah. Major events and updates. If you're asynchronous, how frequently are you actively paying attention to what's happening on the screen?
That means in person, right?
Asynchronous is remote. Synchronous is in person, asynchronous is
The whole
remote.
time.
The whole time you're on the screen. If you're asynchronous, it's like you're always.
Yeah, you're glued to it, right?
Yeah,
Always,
it's
there
like
are
a-
no distractions that happen at home, or even if you're in the office and all on the same call.
You can't watch TV and do this, you know.
Yeah, of course not. But does that mean that we're not doing that? So if there's anything that really is important or requires everyone's attention. I mean, granted, even in a classroom, most people are still looking at a computer screen or a phone or something in general. We live in a distracted age where attention is really difficult. Even my wife, when a good show on Netflix is also on her phone, while watching it. You're not getting the visual cues from it. You're not picking up everything that you could from that one task. But a synchronous meeting, if you're all in a circle and you're all looking at each other, there aren't too many people who have technology out and are working on something else on the side. So that is what allows for the most person-to-person attention. So if you're ever in a situation where you really need to pay attention to that, or if someone calls for a synchronous meeting, regardless of whether you buy that your attention is important or not, the design is such that they think that your attention is worthwhile. When is asynchronous communication better? This can either be an asynchronous meeting or something like, this should be done in an email chain, or this should be done in a Teams message.
Lots of that.
Yeah, lots of back and forth, it can be smaller groups of people. Then don't rope in more people than it affects. Rope in just the people that's needed, and smaller groups mean that you get more airtime. If you're in a group of 2, you're speaking about half the time. If you're in a group of 4, you're speaking about a quarter of the time. If you're in a group of 25, you're speaking about 4% of the time, unless it's a lecture, in which case like 0.25% of the time. Because for some reason I get all the airtime. That's fair, right? So yeah, the kind of meeting is really important for the message that you want to get across. Let's see.
How do you feel about like how on Discord you can have like, you can kind of combine synchronous and asynchronous because you can have like your video on. And it's
Right.
kind of obvious to see who's like engaged or not engaged because we're all like, we have meetings, we all talk to each other and
Yeah.
stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's like the peak, like the best, I feel like.
Yeah, you can have all the different kinds of communication in one place, and you can call for the kind of meeting that you need, or even say, this feels like it's not being productive. Can we all hop in a call and turn our video on?
It's way better
Yeah.
versus because if I don't see someone and they're not talking, I could imagine them just, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, I've taught discrete over COVID. I know exactly what that's like. Everyone had their cameras off. No one was ever contributing to anything, and the test scores were abysmal. Was I teaching to a bunch of cats on desks? I have no idea. Nor really should I. I always felt uncomfortable with that.
To be fair, we didn't think we were gonna make it out of COVID anyway. So it's
This is
fine.
the end of society. Yep. So there's not too much more here that's super important. We should talk about what a sidebar is. What was a sidebar? The concept of a sidebar?
Was essentially just getting off track, people just during the meeting, talking about other stuff and then.
Right.
Just getting off track of the main subject.
Yeah, off track of the main subject. It can even be still related to work. Something like, you know, you're talking about a bug in your program, and I'm having a back and forth with you with 8 other people in the room about something that does not affect any of them. Anyone can shout, just sidebar, something of the sort that says, I'm not getting anything out of this. This seems like it's important. I don't want to distract from it, how important this is, but maybe we should talk about it after the meeting with just the people for whom it's affecting and pull it into a Teams meeting or some kind of individual in-person meeting or an email chain. So feel free to say sidebar.
Means getting off track or getting off track.
Yeah, this is something that's not useful to me anymore. Let's take this idea for whom it is important and find some other way to address that. Let's keep the focus on everyone who is here in this meeting, get through that, dismiss everyone, and then whatever issues arose, you can address those individually with those people.
So is this programming speak?
It's agile speak.
Okay.
Yeah, so meetings are a very important part of being productive. To an extent. Those meetings can stop being productive very quickly. If everyone is there dedicating their time to it, it should be important to them. Then there was, I guess, issue tracking. I just want to really quickly talk about issue tracking. What was it? Why should we use issue tracking?
I mean, whenever issues come up in your code, You can create a request in the repo. And be like, feature XYZ isn't working, and then making sure team is not pretending to look at your reference and see what went wrong.
Yeah, so making sure that issues are public and publicly facing is good, yeah,
Issues, whether it's software or people related, when they add up, it get worse and worse and worse. You
Sure.
want to deal with it, as soon as possible.
yeah, it's a great way to write down and document issues that you find. Let's see, we had design documents, honestly, I think time is probably better spent going back to and making some progress on last bit of content. Any questions about chapter 2 of the book? Anything else I can address that helps you prepare for, so that that material from chapter 1, I think, is the end of what's exactly going to be on the quiz, but eventually there will be quiz material over everything that you've read.
Where did you post the reading for this weekend? Because I didn't see it in the
I think I
announcement.
just mentioned it in class. Okay, sorry.
It's okay.
I try to keep up with my announcements, and this quarter is a lot
I feel
going
that.
on.
I feel that.
There's a lot going on, so yeah, I can't blame anyone when I fail to report things in every avenue that I should. Just make sure that you're keeping up with what's going to be on a quiz before the quiz. My plan for the class is that I don't want to do too many more discussions. In fact, this is probably the last discussion over the book. I just want to make sure that we're getting off on the right track with regards to how to work together, because I've seen a lot go wrong. But I will start to assume that you will read, you will incorporate, and the groups today the best that they can, because there's diminishing returns on how productive these discussions are, I think. Any issue with that? Anyone having such a great time that they'd rather keep doing this over every chapter in the book? Yeah, there's more important fish to fry in the class, but I think we've done well so far, but I am recognizing we've hit that point of diminishing returns. So we're gonna go back to getting some more content. So the last piece of agile processes I want to cover is the concept of extreme programming, and we've talked about this. I'll probably go through this slide deck really quickly as well. But we talked about how waterfall was used, how agile kind of adapted out of waterfall to be a repeated waterfall, and extreme programming is really just making that process as fast as possible, having either daily builds or going through looping back to different waterfall stages as quickly as possible, with focus on communication, focus on fast feedback. This is client feedback, this is project manager feedback, as much feedback as we can get. So it starts to feel more and more collaborative the faster these cycles go. The system is flexible. The system is ready to have its requirements changed on the fly, and you will experience that this quarter as requirements adapt. Some history, you can look into that if you want. Extreme programming has certain aspects to it that make it more efficient. So if the customer is on site, you have meetings with the client, but not just meetings, they're actually always available. That means that you can always go back and clarify something with the client. You can always show them the most recent dev version of the project to make sure you will always loop back to, is this what you're looking for in the middle of a sprint? That seems like it's not necessarily always perfectly feasible. We try to do the best that we can, but the more accessible the client is, the better this will go. In general, the less you put in a release, the better. Just bring up that window so that you're releasing as frequently as possible, but making small changes, releasing something, small changes, releasing something. So extreme programming focuses on that, always publishing the few things that have changed. Testing is an extremely important part of that, because any small change can make a large sweeping, breaking everything with your code. Making sure that refactoring is always a priority. So if the changes in requirements make you feel like there's something we could do to make this code more scalable, then it's important to know and have tools to be able to do that. In general, we're doing a lot of pair programming, continuous integration, which we'll talk about in a bit. Just making sure that we're meeting the associated coding standards and that we're always having something to work on. Extreme programming it can be faster than a 2-week cycle, but in general, if you're doing a 2-week cycle, which is what we're going to be doing in this class, you meet with the client. The purpose of that is to get the information you need to write your user stories, the information that you need to be able to write your acceptance tests from those user stories. So meeting with the client, then you go into your design, breaking those stories down into scenarios and tasks, estimating how long it's going to take to complete those tasks. And then the client can help you, since they're on site, they can help you to prioritize which of those tasks to do first. We won't have that in this class, but I will play that role of being able to help you to be able to select which tasks you should be prioritizing. Then you'll go do the work. If this is test-driven, we'll talk about test-driven development and some stats to back that up, but write the tests before you write the code. Understand the functional requirements of what you're going to implement before you start implementing it. Down to what does it mean at a logical level for this to be complete? Figure out the simplest design that you can to pass those tests. Pair program, refactor the code as needed as it starts to become a problem, and evaluate where are we before you loop back and meet with the client again, and just continue that process until you have developed what the client expects from you. So waterfall looked like this, iterative development looks something more like this, and extreme programming looks something more like this. So we just get faster and faster iterations of that waterfall, but keep in mind that we're still using that general waterfall design. We're just increasing the speed at which we're going through that process and reducing the amount that is in each one of those. And that leads to a better result. It's amazing if the customer is part of the team, that's amazing. So they're always available. Communication and feedback is almost instant. You don't have to schedule a meeting with them and then have that meeting and have planned every single question you want to ask them. It's just a great way to make sure that you're building what the client wants. On the other hand, the customer is involved in every single stage. So by the time you have a requirement document done, the client can look at it. From their perspective, does it work or not? They can negotiate with the team and help the team prioritize. Can write and run the acceptance tests themselves. They're evaluating every release that you have throughout that process. Of course, the issue with it is it's not always feasible. Clients have their own lives. They're not solely in existence just to validate what you are doing. So usually there's some kind of middle ground. I don't know how much more of this I actually care to get. This is always the piece of content that I cut off a little bit because, again, diminishing returns. But we've talked about most of this. We talked about tasks. We'll iterate this a little bit. Each story broken down into its associated tasks. The story was a customer-centered description. The task is a developer-centered description. We have experience with this at this point. But here's a visual of how it might actually come together and work. So I expect to see you utilizing the issue tracker and tasks in GitHub to assign your associated tasks for each sprint. In what we call the planning game, which is an extreme programming term, then the customer is actually helping to do this prioritization. They will choose which stories get implemented in each release. That's not something you have control over. What does the customer want to see? That becomes your priority for what to develop. You'll pick a completion date, pick the stories that you can fit into the associated amount of time, and that becomes how you identify what a sprint is. It's not something that's given to you by a project manager. It's something that is collaborative with the customer. How much time till you see the update? What can we do? According to your priority list, here's what we can reasonably deliver in that period of time. That's what we're going to focus on in this sprint. And if the customer thinks that everything is way easier than it is, then they might have to reprioritize in order to actually get an update. I've talked a bit about what to expect for pair programming, but to reiterate that, someone is writing code, someone is watching them, helping them, thinking about what code is being written, and seeing issues as they arise, but also doing design and validation. What if we did this way instead of that way? They're the second pair of eyes over the process, because it's very easy to get embedded in the line by line of what you're producing that you lose a little bit of sight of the overall picture. And the co-pilot in pair programming can help to keep you on track, can help to make sure that what's being implemented is efficient. And then, of course, it's also really useful to shuffle those pairs. If you disagree in pair programming, that's usually a good instance or it's a way to see some kind of design problem. You can get together as a team and say, we disagreed in this pair programming about how to implement this. Let's have a discussion about what we're expecting.
13, so that we can actually start
Week from Wednesday.
a week from Wednesday, so we're still not implementing anything.
We are implementing the first sprint that I gave at the end of last week. And the first time we're meeting will be his ability to give you sprint 2's information, so you can pretend like you met with him already. And he gave you some generic verbal wording that we all work together to create the first sprint requirements.
So are you, for sprint 1, are we creating those user stories ourselves?
Yes. Okay.
And then after those are created, then we create the tasks.
Yeah, so user stories, I want draft 1 of that due Wednesday. You can start implementing just because you have 2 weeks. But I want to give you feedback on those user stories for how to effectively make them for sprint 2 so that you have a sense of putting that into your workflow. And the reason why I gave you the entire document of all of the requirements is so that that's basically having gone from user stories to tasks. Those requirements that are out there are basically almost in task form. So you can't really go too wrong in the conversion of user story down to task, but I want to start to see your process of how you would do that so that we can get real practice with that at the start of sprint 2. 10 weeks is way too short for a class of this size. It's got a class of this nature. We do what we can. It's intense. Dilbert is always relevant for computer science memes. We're going to try something called extreme programming. First, pick a partner. The 2 of you will work on one computer for 40 hours a week. The new system is a minute old, and I already hate everyone. In 2003, Dilbert had figured out what was wrong with this system. So, pair programming is not perfect. Make sure that you're using an associated spread of some individual work and pair programming where it's going to be efficient. But in general, pair programming does lead to better code. And we're going to talk in a bit about code reviews. We'll probably address that tomorrow. But code reviews are an incredibly important part of writing good code. Pair programming reduces risk. There are way fewer errors when there are 2 brains, especially one abstract brain thinking about the problem as you do it. Improves focus, improves productivity. It helps people to be able to understand the why behind something if you're both working on it collaboratively. What I hear, why would you resist pair programming? It's going to slow you down. There's a lot you can learn from each other. We don't always know and have immediate feedback when we do make mistakes. It's not something that you have immediate access to, unless you have a lot of experience with someone, usually a helicopter parent, hovering over you and pointing out every little thing you do wrong. There are mistakes that you make that you are never aware of. myself included. I probably said ridiculous words when I meant some other word and thought I said that in the first place. But unless someone points it out every single time, I don't necessarily know that's the mistake that I am making. That happens to everyone in their code when it's more important and part of a project as well. So you can start to become more aware of the mistakes that you make if there's someone there to help you to recognize, what if we did this? Were you thinking about this? When you run into that issue and turn in spaghetti code that barely worked, maybe you could have fixed that with a single point if you'd been aware of it at that time.
Sounds like my father.
It's always a helicopter parent. Don't treat your pair programmer partner like a helicopter parent. Please don't. We've all experienced that in some way, shape, or form. No one likes it. If you're afraid to show that you're ill prepared for this course, don't worry, we're all ill prepared for this course. People don't like to project the weaknesses that they feel. We're all struggling in some way, shape, or form. We're just not talking to each other about it quite as much as we are internalizing it and feeling it. So the best way to learn is to be collaborative and to admit that neither of you really know what you're doing, but we're going to figure it out together. All right, some other reasons why this is important. I think we're probably good here. General myth, inefficient use of personnel if you're pair programming. The reason we still do it in practice and in industry is because it's effective. Yeah, this has all been mentioned already.
So how many stories is how much stuff have you done? How many features you've completed?
How many features you're going to complete? Yeah, you do user stories in advance of a sprint. So for the sprint 1 requirements, maybe that's the best use of the last couple minutes of this class is to go back to that and take a look at exactly what I would do. I'll switch this to actually be able to view once I have this up.
So once a feature is complete, it's no longer a story, obviously, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It becomes an acceptance test. It becomes the way to let the client know that something is done and you have a test written for that. So it's gonna be way too small to see, but here are the requirements. So this is where we've mostly broken things down into tasks at this point. You will not have this in the future, but I would imagine writing something like a user story for either a group of these together or individual ones themselves. Do note though that these are more in task form than they are in user story form. So something like should fail if name is invalid or duplicated. That is technical. That is not something that belongs in a user story. The client shouldn't care about when should this particular concept fail when I'm trying to add a class. They just care about, do I have the ability to add a class? You, the programmer, need to think about when should I not add the class that they ask me to, but that's not part of the client's usual workflow. So what you might want to write for this is something even as simple as a user, or even as a user of this program, I want to add a class so that I can incorporate it into my UML. That's a simple user story from a client's perspective, but it's not technical. It justifies why you need to include that functionality. And it's something that you could take to a client and say, does this represent why you want this feature and what you want me to do? And they would say, yes. There's nothing technical about duplication, about invalid names, starting with a capital, anything else of the sort. Straight from the client's perspective. That gets translated down into a task that is be able to add a class by name. Careful note of invalid or duplicate classes in the system. And that would allow you to think, well, if we can't duplicate the class, if the name can be invalid, then there should be some check on that, but maybe you want to utilize some kind of set for how this is being stored, because sets don't allow for duplication in the first place. Interesting. You don't have to check for it if the data structure that you use automatically checks it for you. None of that should be remotely client facing. All of that is something that you yourself are considering that shows up at the task level.
You mean a client doesn't want to hear about sets and relationships?
Maybe relationships, but not the kind that you're thinking of in terms of data structures. Even that, probably best kept out of. Yeah,
So like, you could say, I want to be able to add a class with a name for my UML.
I would say even like a class by name. How are you identifying that class?
With a name.
Yeah, by name, with a name, some way of how is the user being asked, because that becomes a fundamental question. If you have the ability to add a class, find the relationship, like I want to, hey, this class is subclass and add that class, that's a different functional requirement than just being a class.
Okay, and but you can't say, you can't say the user should be able to add a class by name with the
As a, oh, zip, his user story. Are you writing this? As a user.
As a program, I'm writing it.
Yeah, but the user stories are programmed in class.
Was asked from the user's perspective.
Right. We need to separate the user's perspective from the developer's perspective.
The program write the user story.
Yeah, we're writing the user story, the big conversation that we have with clients. So getting the client. You cannot talk about the functional requirements of the class. From that perspective of the client. And imagine talking to, I have no idea what your parents do, if your parents didn't know anything related to computer science, imagine talking to your parents. Imagine talking to someone who has never been to college, who's never graduated high school, someone who is not in the same technical realm. As you can still be able to communicate and develop a program for them that meets their requirements. You cannot send anything technical to the table there because that's not the user application. So the user story perspective is coming from how are you communicating with the client to get an idea of what you need to be doing and thinking about to make sure that you've done things back what they're paying.
So when are these user stories due?
The first draft is due Wednesday.
And it's just a bunch of questions.
It's a bunch of as a, I want to, so that. I'll show you. Almost go line by line through this or group them in some capacity. 350. Yeah, it's been a morning.
It's like, wow, it's too much.